Good evening once again. This is my second lecture on Walter Benjamin's essay, The Task of the Translator. In my first lecture, this is where we have reached in our argument. Benjamin is making some counterintuitive arguments, arguments that go against the flow of common sense. For instance, Benjamin is saying that translations that are focused on the target reader are not good translations. They are bad translations. Translators should not necessarily focus on target reader. The argument is this, that since the original is not written with a reader in mind, why should the translation be written with the reader in mind, should be done with the reader in mind? Moreover, Benjamin is also saying that a translator who just focuses on the message of the source text, of the original, is a bad translator. Because the message, according to Benjamin, is inconsequential content. Benjamin is more interested in how things are being said rather than what is being said. The what, according to Benjamin, is secondary in a work of art. So these are the two primary arguments that Benjamin begins his essay with. So if the task of the translator is not to please a particular readership, if the task of the translator is not to convey the same message as is there in the source text in a different language, then what exactly, according to Benjamin, is the task of the translator? So, what is the task of the translator? In order to answer this question, we need to first talk about Benjamin's view of language system, Benjamin's view of the languages that are there in the world. Benjamin talks about something called the kinship of all languages. 2 points. Benjamin talks about a kinship of all languages, kinship, relationship, and Benjamin talks about pure language or purer language in a comparative term, as a comparative term. We need to understand these two things. What does he mean by a purer language, and what does he mean by kinship of all languages? Starting with the notion of purer language. Benjamin probably draws this from the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. You guys are already acquainted with the story of the Tower of Babel because we discussed this while doing George Steiner. We said that there was a point of time in human history, or so the Old Testament believes, there was a point of time in human history when the entire human race spoke one single language, the pure language. The language was the same language that was spoken by the gods. So we shared a language that is pure, that is whole, and that is complete. A language that is spoken by the gods. Now, as you know, the story of the Tower of Babel, human beings became too arrogant, too proud, and tried to build a tower that would reach the heaven. Now, because the entire human race spoke the same language, they were also united, they were also together. There was great unity among them. As a result, the tower went up and up and up. When God realized the arrogance of humankind, God cursed human beings with a special kind of curse. Everyone, after a thunderbolt, everyone fell unconscious, and when they woke up, they no longer understood each other. Everyone in the world started speaking a different language. This is how the Holy Bible, Testament, the Old Testament, explains the presence of multiple languages in the world. This is how religion explains the presence of multiple languages in the world, that human beings were united, they became arrogant about their power, and therefore God cursed them with a multiplicity of languages that we do not understand. So we spend our time, because we do not understand each other, we spend our time fighting among ourselves. We form groups, linguistic groups, and we are constantly bickering and fighting among ourselves, and we are no longer united. So God did this to break down human unity and to teach a lesson for human arrogance. All these multiple languages that were created out of that one pure whole language are actually, according to the biblical story, fragments of the original language. So these multiple languages, they are all broken fragments. So we are still speaking the same language, but all of us only know a part of the whole language. So all the languages that we have in the world right now are actually parts, fragments of a language that is whole, pure, and complete, that is not broken. Our languages, Bengali, English, Assamese, Urdu, Tamil, Telugu, these are all broken fragments according to the Old Testament according to theologists, of the whole and pure language. Now, that is the notion of the pure language. That is the biblical notion of the pure language. So, let's keep that in hand. Let's talk about what Benjamin means by the kinship of all languages. Now, you guys have studied philology, and we know how scientifically languages evolved. One language evolved from other. So there is a mother language. For instance, Sanskrit is a mother language which gave birth to so many languages which are sister languages. For instance, Bengali, Hindi, Tamil. These are all related in the sense that they are evolved from the same mother language. For instance, Sanskrit and Latin are supposed to be sister languages which have evolved from the Indo-European language, the original Indo-European language, which became subdivided, which evolved into two languages, Latin in Europe and Sanskrit in our country. You know the philological history of language as such. But please understand, this is crucial. When Benjamin talks about kinship of all languages, Benjamin does not mean this particular kind of relationship, that all languages are related to each other, or that all languages are related to each other in the sense they have evolved from a common source. That is not what Benjamin is talking about when Benjamin is saying that all languages are related to each other. They are kins. What does Benjamin mean when Benjamin is talking about kinship of all languages? Benjamin means that languages are related to each other because all languages try to do the same thing. They intend to do the same thing. So the purpose of each and every language is the same. What is the purpose of a language? To be able to describe the world around us and inside us. To be able to describe, so we create words. Every language has words that try to describe the world around us and the world that is inside us. So in that sense, all languages have the same purpose. Please understand this. All languages have the same purpose. They are trying to do the same thing. They are doing that same thing differently. For instance, in English, we call this person father. Right? We describe a particular person we are related to as father. In Hindi, we describe that same person as Pita. In Bengali, we describe that same person as Baba. The language, the word, is trying to do the same thing, trying to describe a particular relationship. The purpose, the intention of the language, the motivation of the language is the same. They are trying to describe a particular relationship. The only difference is that they are doing it differently. They are doing it differently. So the sea in one language becomes samundar in another language, becomes sagar in another language, becomes somudro in another language. But the purpose is to describe the same thing, which is the sea, right? So languages are related to each other. Languages have a inherent kinship, not because they have evolved from the same source or anything, but because they have the same purpose. They try to do the same thing. Languages are related. So we have understood two things. Please understand. There is this notion of a pure language, a language that is whole and complete, and the idea that all the languages that actually exist in the real world are actually broken fragments of that language which is whole and complete. And this notion of kinship of all languages, where all languages are supposed to be related to each other because their function, as far as their function is concerned, they are the same. They are trying to describe the same thing, but they are doing it differently. How do these two notions become relevant to Benjamin's idea of the task of the translator? That is what we need to understand now. Please note, Benjamin has already discarded the target reader as the purpose or function of translation. Benjamin has already discarded the content, the message content contained in the source text as the purpose of translation or the focus of translation. Benjamin is saying that there is only one singular focus of a translator, and that is relationship between two languages. The translator acts as a bridge. According to Walter Benjamin, the translator acts as a bridge, a negotiator between two different languages. A translator interprets one language and brings that language into another language. The translator focuses on, remember, Benjamin has already said that all languages are connected to each other. They're kins. There's a kinship of all languages. The translator operates in this relationship area. The translator builds relationship between two languages. That is what, according to Walter Benjamin, the actual focus of the translator should be. The translator acting as a negotiator between two languages. What happens as a result of this negotiation? Benjamin also talks about that. Benjamin says, every act of good translation raises the language to a level of greater purity. Remember, the languages are related but they are fragments, they are broken fragments. What the translator is doing actually is the translator is bringing these two languages who are related, but they have been broken, they are broken fragments. The translator is bringing these two related languages together, closer to each other. The translator is building relationship, focusing on the relationship between these two languages, and as a result, the translator is giving birth to a language. The translator is producing a language that is purer, which means it is closer to that pure language which is whole and complete, which is not fragmented. Please understand, Benjamin nowhere says that through translation we are going to achieve that pure language. No, the pure language is just an ideal notion. The notion of that pure language, one language that is whole and complete and capable of describing everything in the world, is just an ideal notion. There are things that Bengali can describe, but we do not have the words for that in English. There are things that English can describe, but we do not have the words for that in Hindi. There are things that Hindi can describe, but we do not have the same expressions in Tamil. So every language is incomplete. Every language is a fragment, right? All the language, if they can be brought together and molded in some magical process into one whole language, that would be that ideal notion of pure language. But that is not possible. Benjamin is not even saying that. But Benjamin is pointing out the fact that whenever a translator does his or her work well, a translator brings two language systems together. As a result of bringing these two language systems together, the translator gives birth to a language which is of a higher order, of a purer order than both the source languages, because this is a language where two languages have interacted with each other, negotiated with each other, and have come together to express a language which is slightly more whole, slightly more complete than the original source language. So do you understand the idea? The translator is the conduit. The translator is the conduit through which two languages can interact with one another to give birth to a language which is slightly closer, one step closer to that ideal notion of one pure language which is whole, complete, intact, and not fragmented. So that is what, according to Benjamin, the purpose, the task of a translator should be. I'm finishing this lecture at this point. There will be another lecture, a third lecture, where I'll conclude Walter Benjamin's The Task of the Translator. There are 3 or 4 points, short points. The essay is so rich. The essay is so rich in content and ideas, philosophical ideas, that it is difficult to describe all of them in one lecture. So I have kept 3 or 4 points separate. We will deal with that in my next lecture, but please try to listen to this one carefully and try to understand what I am saying. If you have any confusion about whatever I have said today, please feel free to get in touch with me. I'll be happy to explain. Thank you.